Hello, welcome. We are live. This is the Hire Me Podcast live show. We go live every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific, where I'm at. I'm on the West Coast, Best Coast. My name is Chris Lynn, and I'm one of the co-hosts on the Hire Me Podcast. It's always a frivolous Friday. That's the term that I heard recently, Heather, is that whenever things are goofy on Fridays, it's a frivolous Friday.
I support this. I support Frivolous Friday. Absolutely. I think we all need one.
A
So,
hundred, 100%. Well, again, this is the Hire Me Podcast live show. However, we do have our uh, shows where we are elevating today's top talents by interviewing job seekers, job hunters, those who are in the job market and looking for their next gig by creating 10-minute video resumes, interviewing these amazing talents that are out on the market today and getting them noticed by recruiters and creating something that they can share with hiring managers and hiring teams. So welcome. If you are joining us live, feel free to add your comments, questions, thoughts, whatever you would like in the comments below. We'll be sure to address them. And Heather, why don't you introduce our topic today?
I'm so excited. Hey, everybody. Heather Balcerek, the other co-host. And yeah, I live in Florida, but I live on the west coast of Florida. So West Coast, Best Coast. Thanks so much. Uh, so I live on the Gulf side. So nice, pretty water here. So today's topic, absolutely one of my favorites. It's not the beach. Sorry, y'all. But we are going to talk about interviews and the STAR, CAR, SOAR format, right? How do you answer an interview question in a way that will impress the person you're talking to? Whether it's the recruiter, a hiring manager, a panelist, whatever the case is, like what can set you apart in terms of answering an interview question. And this is something I am extremely passionate about, as not only a candidate, but as somebody who's been a hiring manager who has done a bazillion interviews. Like, I'm really passionate about this because it shows, it can show so much about your skill set and the things that you can do for the person you're interviewing with. And if you prepare properly, it's not as hard as you think. So,
Yeah, 100%. I mean, well, first off, let's acknowledge those who are in the chat. Jonathan, hello. Swin. I hope I am saying your name right. Leilani, welcome.
hi.
Thank you for joining us live. Again, if you're just now joining us, we're talking about interview prep and using the CAR, STAR, SOAR, fly, whatever. I'm making up terms method, right? And so, I mean, let's break these down essentially because these frameworks, right, Heather, are ways for us as interviewees, those of us who are, interviewing for jobs, a format for us to create a very clear and concise answer to interview questions. So I figure, you know what, let me share what each of those three terms are. STAR stands for situation, tasks, or actions and results. I did five fingers. I don't know why I did that. Situation, tasks, actions, and results. So that's STAR. SOAR is situation, obstacles, actions, and results. So very similar. And then CAR is challenge, action, and result. So all three of these methods need to show the result and show the action that you took. STAR and SOAR both say, this is the situation at up front. So, Heather, what tips do you have when you talk about these different methods when answering questions?
So the first tip that I have is you got to start way before you get to the interview. Um, one of the things that I recommend people do, right, whenever you are going through a job search, really honestly, before you even start a job search, is write down these stories, right? Write down those things that you have done that have gotten some results. So I have a spreadsheet that lists out situation, task, action, results. And so let me see. I pulled it up actually, and I'm gonna give you an example of what one might be. That's maybe not too long. Okay, so one of my situations was I was on a new team, right? And we had no branding. And it was really important for us to have that. So in this box, I wrote, when I joined Amazon, our organization was brand new and it had been formed 3 weeks prior to me starting. And so we needed a brand to identify us. So that was this kind of my opening, like what the situation was. Now, the obstacle or task, right? I was brand new and we needed this. So the task was like to create it. And then the actions that I took. And so here, how I kind of wrote this out, it says, I volunteered to design and deploy branding for our team based on our branding guidelines. I worked through the appropriate approval processes to ensure that all branding standards were met. And then, so really quick and easy, this one's not uber detailed. But then what was the result of this? Right. The result was that I brought a consistent look and feel to all of the products that were brought out by our team. And in the second quarter, I actually led the development of a full style guide and updated our internal web page, our wiki for our team too. So from starting with just giving us an identity, working all the way through to getting us brand identity for our internal web page as well. And so that's the result, right? I was able to not only do just the one thing, but do
Yeah.
more. And so having it written out like in columns is really important because it helps you see the story and tell the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never actually thought of it that way and thought of organizing it that way. Um, but that's really smart because then when you type it out in that scenario, the I would imagine that your situation and task need to be shorter, but then your action and results needs to be longer. So if you're typing it out in the columns, you can very easily see like, oh, I'm spending too much time setting up the story or providing context. So how can I maybe whittle that down a little bit? Or you know what? I'm not explaining the actions that I did and I'm not explaining the impact that I had, the results. So that's a really great tip, Heather. I think that's fantastic, especially those of us who want to be like to be organized. That's not me, by the way. um but for those of you who are really really organized and like love prepping and want to be sure that you're really like set and ready to go, I think that that's a great method. Again, if you're we have several of you who are in the chat with us, so feel free to add your questions and thoughts on the STAR method. Happy to chat about that here. And Heather, I think that the STAR method for me really is about how you can bring value into the organization. And the way that I see the STAR method being utilized really well is well, first, as you're prepping, is there's lists and lists and articles of lists of the questions that you might be asked in interviews. And so you can, these are the top 10 interview questions. These are the top, 3 interview questions, whatever list you want to go off of. But all of these lists will help you prep. And by doing so, you can say, okay, these are the 3, 5, 10 questions that I want to prepare for. And I will write out my answer for each of these questions. And so having that will be beneficial. The other thing that I recommend people doing is you have the job description from the application and they say what you will be doing or what you'll be solving. So if you can tailor your answers to address the job responsibilities or the roles, actions, or the things that you're being brought in to solve, that will make just that much more of an impact for that you have on those that you're interviewing with. Andrew, see you in the chat. Hello, hello from the UK. Oh, look at that. We are
Hey.
international now, Heather. We
Woo!
are
Yes.
international. Yeah.
Yes. And Chris, I think you bring up a good point about like there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. And when I started this organization part, right, like getting ready to do interviews, I didn't start out by writing all those words. I started out by going, okay, what have I done? Okay, hey, I made a brand. Okay, there's a situation. I made a brand. And so it started with just small things. And then I would go back and revisit and say, okay, what were those actions? And I would write those out. And then it evolved into being full sentences. And some people, I need full sentences. That way I can practice. Some people just need bullets, and that's fine too. It's yours, right? It's your tracker. It's you do what you want with it. Um, but it's just know that it's always evolving. I mean, I have, now because I started this tracker when I left Apple and went to Amazon. So now it has examples from like my job before Apple, my job at Apple, and now it has Amazon. So I have continued to build this. And as I was going through interviewing, right, looking at the company, looking at those the job description, okay, what matches to what? And so when I would go into an interview, I was able to say, these are probably going to be the ones that are going to be the best for me. There's one other thing that I want to like, it's like an extra add-on a little bit to really like once you get the star format car, whatever you want to call it, down, right? You're telling the story with very specific, detailed information, not generalized, specific information, is to add a V. So it can be a V star, RV soar, RV car, right? And that V stands for value. And you mentioned that a second ago. But when you're looking and researching a company and you look at their values, how can you tie your answers in with their values? How can you show that you do collaborate with other people or that you do know how to drive innovation? Or that you are accountable. Like, how can you show that and weave their values and say those words in your answers?
That's so brilliant. I hadn't even thought of that. And that, man, that is a whole nother level that you're bringing it up to. Yeah, I mean, I think for you and me, Heather, being people not recruiting people, right? Again, we're not recruiters, we're not in the talent acquisition field. We are in the learning and development, talent development field. I feel like you and I always our work always makes us start at the end, right? So we always look at like what is the result, what is the end result, and then we work backwards from there. At least I do. But then adding that value piece really shows how you are leaned into the organization. And a lot of times for interviewers, if you are showcasing how you connect with values for the org without saying it outright, right? Like not being like, "Oh, this is how I collaborate just like you guys do here at this company," right? It's like,
Right.
in this situation, this was the action, this is how I collaborated to do, this, and this was the end result. It creates an unconscious connection for them being like, "Hey, this person would fit in great here because they are living out our culture. They're living out how we behave already, and they are adding that additional value in to this role." We are getting some great questions in right now
Yes.
from Jonathan and Chris. We will get to that in just a second. Heather, I have one more thing that I want to share about like
Yeah.
Star, but it's specific to our podcast. So, I mean, before we move on to that, any final thoughts or any more tips on using Star, Car, or Soar?
I mean, I could talk about this for hours, so but I will hold so we can answer some questions.
For sure, for sure. Well, I was gonna say, for those of you who are joining us, or you are job hunting, or someone who is job hunting, guess what? When we do these interviews and we create these video resumes, which are free by the way, we don't charge a dang thing, so you better take advantage. We send you all 6 questions ahead of time. So there is no reason to not use any of these formats to really showcase your impact on an organization, the value that you have to an organization. So just want to share that real quick. And if you want to get signed up, I will put the QR code right up here for you. So you can scan that. If you're listening to this on the podcast, you can't scan it because you're listening to it. So
But
we'll
the
put the
links are
sign.
down there.
Yeah, the links are down below. They're in the show notes. So yeah, if you are job hunting or you know someone who's job hunting and could use a way to stand out in today's incredibly crazy job market, get signed up. It's completely free. It takes 15 minutes. We create a 10-minute or less video resume for you, and you can share that with whoever you want. All right, let's get to your questions. Jonathan, first you asked, what are some things that should never be discussed as an interviewee? There's a laundry list there.
There's a laundry list. Obviously there is a list of like HR things that number one, you should never be asked. So you should never answer. We are not HR professionals.
No,
So
we're not that either.
I don't, I mean, we may live in the HR space, but we are not HR professionals, but definitely things like age or, religion, or, orientation, like those kind of things, right? You want to, steer away from those, especially if you were asked directly, because they should not be asking those things.
Mhm.
Um, but I think from just a candidate perspective, like things that you should not discuss, I don't want to say that there's anything that's really off limits. I think it's really in how you discuss it. So some
Yeah.
people, may be nervous to say, well, should I discuss my layoff? Or should I talk about when I was fired? Maybe you don't want to talk about like, hey, they fired me, but maybe you want to talk about if they ask you a question about have you made a mistake? And so maybe when you got fired, maybe you had made a mistake. Maybe it was something that you realize now, like, man, definitely that was wrong. Shouldn't have done it. You can talk about the mistake, but not that you got fired.
Yeah. It really is about framing, I think, how you frame different situations, going back to STAR, right? It's all about how you frame the situation. I will say just kind of outright, oh, I have a visitor. I will say outright,
Yes.
is you should not talk about interpersonal relationships, good or bad. And so that's one thing, because that can be seen as like kind of gossipy or clicky, or you can't handle that interpersonal conflict one way or another. So that's really the only thing that I would recommend not talking about as an interviewee, is just don't talk about kind of like I mean, let's be honest, right? Like, we don't get along with everyone that we work with, so I wouldn't bring those potentially negative or consequential like relationships up.
Yeah.
If
And
you I was just
go
gonna
ahead.
say,
Sorry.
like, going back to you, Heather, like, you can maybe use that as like hey, how have I overcome, a teammate who I think the questions are usually around like, hey, how have you overcome when like you didn't get along with a coworker or something like that, and you can use that as an example of like how you overcame that barrier. But I wouldn't talk about it in oh, I didn't like this person and they had it out for me, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Don't you led right into something that just reminded me. You never want to talk badly about a former company, a former coworker, a former boss. Never talk bad about them. You may have all those feelings, but you do not want to talk about how, well, this previous company was terrible to me. They did XYZ. You don't want to do that, because then that can set you up in a negative light. So be
Yeah,
careful
a hundred
around
percent.
doing that. Um, Again, focus on things that you have learned, that you have done, the results you have gotten.
Yeah, 100%. I was also gonna say, don't ever say that you don't know how to do something. Don't like, I would just, even if you don't have the direct relational experience, it's important to find something similar in your mind that is. So if you don't know, don't say you don't know. It is always okay and I've done this plenty of times to say, hey, give me a moment to think. I would like to formulate my answer or something like that. So that's always a great delay tactic if you need to, if
Yes.
you get a question that you weren't necessarily expecting.
And it's 100% like as somebody does tons of interviews, like absolutely please do. Like please take that time. We want your interviewer wants you to win. I hope y'all know that. Now I would say 8.75 times out of 10 your interviewer wants you to win. They want you to do well, to present well. So take that time, take that moment. They're okay. They can take a sip of water, they can finish up notes. Like it's okay.
Yeah.
We want you to put your best foot forward.
Yeah. 100%. And I would say the final thing too is anything that is um unrelated personal information. So if it just has nothing to do with the organization or the role, I wouldn't bring it up. So yeah, that's the only thing. That is a great question, Jonathan. All right, Chris, we'll move to you. And again, if you are joining us live in the chat, feel free to add your comments, thoughts, questions. We want to discuss it. Chris asks, what are a few key questions to ask the interviewer to get realistic expectations about the role versus what is in the job description? That's a great
So,
question.
such a good question.
I mean, I feel
Um,
like your question to us is kind of the question, like, is one of
right?
the questions. Like, hey, what is not listed in the job description that I should know about this role?
Yeah.
Like, what are some of the things that, are some of the supplemental or administrative tasks that that are, excuse me, not in the job description? Or maybe who are some of the collaboration what are some of the collaboration points, or who are some of the teams that I would be interacting with that aren't listed here in the job? Heather, what else do you have?
So because I tracked all of these things, I have a whole list of questions. And maybe I'll try to put something together and share it. Do not hold me to that in any kind of time frame. But like, so one of the questions that I asked for the role specifically, that I have now is like I put in there is like, well, in the job description, it mentioned developing reports, metrics, and scorecards. So what does reporting currently look like? So taking something that may be very generic or vague that's in the job description, ask for more detail. Well, what does that mean? How does that look? What programs are you say I need to be good at an LMS system. Which one?
Yep.
Like that's helpful information. And I asked a lot of questions too around like how were the teams structured and organized? Because having been in places where there really wasn't support, you had to do all of it yourself, to being on a team where we had learning, experienced designers and learning technologists, and like, I didn't have to do everything. It was important for me to know, like, what does that support look like for the role? And so that's something that's not going to be in there, and it's going to give you realistic expectations on your specific duties.
Yeah.
Are you going to have, and I can speak from an L&D perspective. So are I going to have an instructional designer to help me? Or am I going to have to do those things myself? Do you have branding guidelines, or do I have to come up with those things? So just digging deeper into those things that maybe aren't clear, but are important to you for you to be successful.
Yeah. And especially in your expertise as you're applying for these roles, um, once you have that interview, right? I always go back to the job description and say, okay, what are the things that are just really vague, or, just not, like, we just don't know, right? And so um it's just so important to do that. I would also say that Sorry, I got distracted by a pop-up on my screen. I'm like, I don't know what's happening.
I know it says we
the
got disconnected from LinkedIn, so I have
yeah,
no idea what's happening right
I
now.
don't know if we're still streaming live to LinkedIn right now. Let's see. If you're still on LinkedIn, can you just like drop a comment and just say like, "Hey, we're still here." That would be great. So let me just see if I can reconnect us as we're going through. I'm sure we're still live though on like YouTube. But all right, I'm reconnecting us. Here we go.
Okay.
All right. Oh, okay. It was reconnected. You're good to go. That's what it says. Cool. Realistic expectations. Just really understand. Yeah, going back to like your expertise and really leaning on that expertise. I would just really focus on that and under get a better understanding of what is actually happening in the organization. The other thing is as well is the question I love answering or sorry asking. I'm getting all flustered now that we had that pop up. Um, is what? How am I going to be measured on these expectations? Right. So here's the job description. You say I need to do X, Y, Z, or A through Z, whatever. How am I going to be measured, or how will I know I'm successful at this work? And so that will provide that extra layer of depth for you and really show that you're thinking about the role as a whole.
Oh, so look again, could just talk about this for so long. Another thing, like going back to what I talked about before, like tying into the values. So we talked about a buzzword on here before, collaboration. What does that mean? And so like Maximus, right? One of our values is collaboration. So in my interview, I asked because I wanted realistic expectations, right? So with that being a company value, like what does collaboration look like in this department? How does that actually come out there? Because again, it gives you that like realistic look into it, and it's always going to depend to who you ask this to, right? Your recruiter is not going to know that question, know that answer. That's going to be something that you ask your hiring manager if you have a panel interview with maybe some peers, or like some cross-functional teams that work together, because they should let you know how they interact with you.
Yep.
If they don't, ask them, please. Uh, so, um, so just be mindful of that too, right? What can give you a realistic answer from who you're asking it? That statement made sense, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I think it's time to wrap up. We're coming up on 30 minutes.
Oh,
I don't even
gosh,
know if
so
that
fast.
happened that went so quick. And I also don't even know if we're like still like live streaming live onto LinkedIn right now.
We
But
got 2 green checks, so I'm
yeah,
gonna go that we're good.
yeah. Okay. So but again, this has been the Hire Me podcast live. Before we log off, I need to give props to someone who we interviewed and who is someone I've personally worked with in the past. Mike Gresham, he just announced that he's starting a new role. So, Mike, if you are watching this, and I'm going to tag you in this later anyway, so you know that we talked about you. Congratulations. We are so I'm so glad you put that in there.
I love the confetti.
So excited for you. Again, if you want to be part of our podcast, again, this is a completely free thing that Heather and myself do in our spare time to support those of you who are job hunting, because guess what? We were just there. I was hunting for several months. Heather, you were searching for a while as well. And we were just so frustrated with the lack of humanness in the way that this is all carried out. So any final thoughts or on signing up or anything like that, or what we
Oh, just hey, I want to just be mindful too. Like when you sign up, right? I am in the Eastern time zone in the U.S. Chris is in Pacific time zone in the U.S. So it should be set to show it in your time zone. However, just please double check it, because we want to make sure that we respect your time, and that it gets scheduled at the right time.
yeah, 100%. So again, if you want to sign up, Here is our QR code. If you're listening to us, the links will be down below in the show notes. Sign up for onto Heather's calendar, sign up onto our mine, either one of ours. We are open, and make sure you give us that subscribe and follow. So if you're watching right now live, make sure you hit that follow button. We just passed 500 followers on LinkedIn last week. We are approaching 50 on YouTube. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot. So make sure you are subscribing and following us everywhere you watch these videos or wherever you are listening to this podcast.
Yes.
All
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
Thank you. Take care.